The black woman they looked down on in court silenced all of Chicago with one move. Welcome to Stories Around Us, a seemingly ordinary trial in Chicago. A black woman walks into the courtroom, met with skeptical glances and murmurs of judgment. Everyone thinks they know who she is and how this story will end, but no one suspects that this woman is about to silence not just the courtroom, but the entire city. This isn't just the story of a trial. It's a journey of truth, courage, and a reversal no one saw coming. If you're inspired by stories that move the heart and spark reflection, don't forget to subscribe to Stories Around Us and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a meaningful journey. Now, let's begin. It was a chilly autumn morning in Chicago. The city courthouse buzzed with tension, the courtroom already filled to capacity. In the midst of this atmosphere, Danielle Carter quietly stepped inside and chose a modest seat near the back. A black woman in her early 30s. Danielle had a small frame and a composed presence, dressed simply in a pale blue blouse and black slacks. She looked like an ordinary office worker. No one in the room knew who she truly was, and because of that, she was dismissed without a second thought. As soon as Danielle sat down, a court security officer approached her, eyes scanning her up and down. "Ma'am," he said, polite but firm, "the front rows are reserved for family and press. Please move further back," even though there were plenty of empty seats nearby. She was asked to relocate, as if her presence wasn't entirely welcome. Danielle offered a soft smile and didn't argue. She quietly moved to the very last row, where a large column partially blocked her view of the judge's bench. That small moment reminded her here, in this room, she was seen only as an anonymous black woman, nothing more. Across the courtroom, a group of people, likely friends and colleagues of the defendant, clustered together. They exchanged uneasy glances when they noticed Danielle. A middle-aged man in civilian clothes leaned toward another and muttered, "Just loud enough to hear another one of them here to watch the show?" His tone dripped with sarcasm. Danielle heard him clearly, but pretended not to react. Her chest tightened. She knew exactly who them referred to. Because of her skin color, she had automatically been lumped into the other side, seen as the enemy of those defending a white police officer now on trial. At the front rows, reserved for the victim's family, Linda Evans, the mother of Jamal Evans. The young man at the center of the case sat quietly among relatives. She wore a simple black dress, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. Her face was drawn, eyes red from countless sleepless nights, gazing into nothing. Danielle wanted to go to her, to offer comfort, but held herself back. For now, she would remain just a silent witness, another stranger who shared the weight of grief. A cold draft snuck in through a window crack, and Danielle shivered. She couldn't tell if it was from the air or the rising tension pressing on her chest. At the defense table stood Officer Mark Peterson, the man at the center of it all. Calmly adjusting the collar of his uniform, the tall, broad-shouldered white man looked completely at ease. His eyes scanned the gallery, briefly landing on Danielle before moving on, as if she were invisible. He turned to his wife seated nearby and gave a confident nod, as if to reassure her everything would go just fine. To Peterson and those around him, this trial was nothing more than an inconvenience, another legal formality to sit through. Danielle exhaled slowly, steadying herself. She hadn't come to feel welcome, she came to see if justice would prevail. Though dismissed, overlooked, and misunderstood, she held a truth within her, one that could tip the balance of this entire case. She clenched her hands in her lap, nails pressing into her palms to ground herself. The whispers, the looks, the quiet contempt they would all have to make room for the truth. "Stay calm, Danielle," she reminded herself. "You're here for the right reason." Suddenly, the sound of the judge's gavel echoed sharply across the room, pulling everyone out of their thoughts. The trial of Mark Peterson had officially begun. As everyone stood to acknowledge the judge, Danielle slowly raised her head and looked around. She could already feel it. This would not be a simple trial. This would be a battle of truth against perception, justice against prejudice, all unfolding right here in the heart of Chicago. The solemn judge took his seat at the bench, and the room quieted into respectful stillness. After formally opening the trial, the judge gave the floor to the prosecution. A middle-aged man with graying hair in a sharp gray suit rose and walked confidently to the center of the courtroom. He turned to the jury, his voice steady and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to uncover the truth behind the death of Jamal Evans, an 18-year-old who lost his life during a confrontation with police. The defendant, Officer Mark Peterson, is charged with using excessive and unnecessary force that resulted in the tragic death of an unarmed civilian. He emphasized that Jamal Evans had no weapon on him, nor had he made any threatening moves. In short, the use of lethal force on this young man was unjustifiable. His opening statement was brief but heavy. He gave a concise overview of the events that night and asserted that the evidence would prove Peterson had grossly violated the victim's civil rights. Danielle listened intently, her heart quietly thankful that the prosecutor underscored what she knew to be true. Jamal had no weapon, and he hadn't attacked anyone. She silently hoped the jury would grasp the gravity of what had happened. Then came the defense. A slick-looking attorney in his 40s, dressed in a polished black suit, stepped forward. A polite, practiced smile played on his lips as he began. His voice measured and composed members of the jury. "The death of Jamal Evans is undeniably a tragedy. My client, Officer Peterson, grieves this loss deeply. But we are not here to decide this case based on emotion. We are here to examine the facts objectively, under the law." A chill ran down Danielle's spine. She could already predict the direction he was heading. And sure enough, he continued. "The evidence will show that Officer Peterson was forced to make a split-second decision to protect himself. It was a late night in a high-crime area. Officer Peterson observed Jamal Evans engaging in suspicious behavior, possibly attempting to break into a car. When approached, the young man made sudden, aggressive gestures and failed to comply with commands. Officer Peterson believed he was reaching for a weapon at his waist. Under such circumstances, he had no choice but to act in defense of his life. A few people in the gallery, likely Peterson's supporters, nodded slightly in agreement. Danielle bit her lip. The defense attorney's words sounded rational on the surface, but beneath them lay a troubling narrative. They were painting Jamal as a dangerous criminal, based solely on the fact that he was in a high-crime neighborhood late at night, and that he reacted with understandable alarm when approached. In an instant, an unarmed black teenager had been recast as a looming threat. The attorney continued, emphasizing Peterson's spotless record. "Officer Peterson has served this city with distinction for 15 years. Not once has he faced disciplinary action. He's patrolled that neighborhood for years, protecting its residents from crime. He understands how dangerous it can be when dealing with potentially hostile suspects. On that night, he was simply fulfilling his duty under extraordinarily difficult circumstances." Danielle watched the jury's reaction closely. Most of them were white and middle-aged, their expressions unreadable. But she noticed a few nod subtly when the attorney referenced high-crime areas and suspicious individuals. She sighed inwardly. Prejudice had begun to slip into the room like a silent fog. To an uncritical ear, the defense's story might sound like the account of a dedicated officer caught in a tragic misunderstanding. But to Danielle, it was a carefully crafted distortion. In the corner of the room, Jamal's mother, Mrs. Linda Evans, lowered her head, her shoulders trembling slightly. When the attorney referred to her son as a suspicious individual, she could no longer hold back tears. To her, Jamal was no threat. He was a freshman in college, a gentle young man walking home from the library that night, a painful truth that, in this opening moment, was already being buried under convenient assumptions. Danielle clenched her hands tightly, her gaze darkening. She understood the strategy discredit the victim, recast him as the aggressor, and shield the officer behind a wall of duty and fear. But she also knew the truth, and that truth would not stay silent for long. As the opening arguments concluded, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier. The judge nodded and invited the prosecution to call their first witness. Danielle straightened her back. From this point on, the real battle was about to begin, a battle between deeply rooted bias and the unwavering force of truth. Before we continue, what are your thoughts so far? Do you believe justice will truly prevail in this case? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story has you thinking deeply, don't forget to hit that like button to support our work and subscribe for more true stories that reveal the unseen sides of society. Tap the bell icon so you won't miss what comes next, because the story is just getting started. The prosecutor called the first witness a lead investigator from the Chicago Police Department, the officer responsible for collecting the evidence in the case. He stepped up to the witness stand, took the oath, and began to describe the surveillance footage obtained from a nearby store's security camera. The courtroom fell into utter silence as the screen was lowered and the projector flickered to life. Danielle leaned forward, heart pounding. She had watched this video countless times during the investigation, and yet each time, it still made her stomach twist. She knew every frame by heart, but for most of the people in that room, this would be their first time witnessing the truth for themselves. The screen lit up with footage of a quiet city street under the dim yellow glow of street lamps. Jamal Evans appeared in the corner of the frame wearing a dark jacket and backpack, walking along a nearly empty sidewalk. The timestamp in the corner read 11:23 p.m. He stopped beside a parked car, perhaps to search for his keys in his bag. Moments later, another figure entered the frame from the left, Officer Peterson, in full patrol uniform, approaching Jamal from behind. The two seemed to exchange words. There was no audio, and Jamal turned suddenly, startled, taking a step back. His body language was clear, hands held midair, palms outward, a universal sign of submission, not aggression. Peterson drew his gun. Even in black and white footage, it was unmistakable. The weapon pointed directly at the young man. Jamal flinched, visibly terrified, and raised his hands high above his head. His backpack slipped off his shoulder and fell to the ground. In the very next moment, Peterson lunged forward, grabbing Jamal's shoulder and shoving him hard against the side of the vehicle. Jamal's entire body trembled, his fear palpable even without sound. One could almost imagine him pleading, trying to explain, to beg. Then the unthinkable happened. Peterson stepped back just slightly, his gun still trained on Jamal, who remained pinned between the car and the officer's large frame. Without warning, a flash lit the screen. The gun had fired. Jamal's body jolted violently, his knees buckled, and he began to collapse toward the ground. In the last few frames, just before Peterson moved and blocked the camera's view, Jamal's lifeless form crumpled on the pavement. A gasp echoed through the courtroom. Mrs. Linda Evans clutched her mouth, breaking into sobs. Others in the gallery reacted with stunned cries. Several members of the jury widened their eyes, visibly shaken. On the video, Peterson could then be seen searching Jamal's body, flipping him over and handcuffing his limp arms behind his back. There was no weapon, nothing even remotely threatening in Jamal's hands or around him, only a book and a few sheets of paper scattered from his backpack. The prosecutor paused the video at the haunting image of Jamal lying motionless on the sidewalk. His bag spilled open beside him. He turned to the jury, his voice low and full of gravity. "You've seen it for yourselves. Jamal Evans was unarmed." He complied. His hands were raised, and yet he was still shot. In that moment, the truth stood naked before the court. The defense attorney shifted in his seat, color draining from his face. At the defendant's table, Peterson sat frozen, fingers interlocked so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Gone was the calm self-assurance he displayed earlier. His eyes avoided the screen completely, as if refusing to acknowledge what everyone else had just seen. Among his supporters in the gallery, silence hung thick. A few lowered their heads in discomfort, no longer able to meet each other's gaze. Danielle let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since the video began. Her heart eased ever so slightly. At last, the truth she had carried for so long painfully and quietly had been laid bare for all to see. It was no longer hearsay, no longer speculation. It was now undeniable. The judge called for order and reminded the jury to remain focused. He gave a brief moment for everyone to collect themselves after the emotional shock, then gestured for the prosecutor to continue. The prosecutor asked the investigator a few final questions, confirming the video's authenticity and chain of custody, before concluding the presentation of the first piece of evidence. As the investigator stepped down from the stand, the jurors remained fixated on the screen, as though still haunted by the final image. The judge granted a short recess to allow the courtroom to regain composure. Danielle leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, taking a moment to process the weight of what had just transpired. The sounds of muffled sobbing, quiet murmurs of outrage, and rustling papers filled the space around her. And yet, beneath it all, she felt the flicker of something fragile but powerful hope. Hope that, at long last, truth had found its voice in this courtroom. Following the shocking surveillance footage, the prosecution moved swiftly to present additional witnesses to strengthen the case. The first was Mr. Malik Johnson, a night security guard working at a nearby building. Mr. Johnson had witnessed the entire incident from the window of his guard booth, taking the stand with calm composure. Mr. Johnson recalled the harrowing night. "I saw the officer approach the young man," he said, voice steady and clear. "I heard the boy Jamal shout, 'Please don't shoot! I didn't do anything wrong!' His hands were in the air, and then the gun went off." The courtroom fell into stunned silence as his account matched the video footage perfectly. Mr. Johnson paused, his eyes flickering with sorrow. The prosecutor gave him a respectful nod before continuing. "Did you hear Officer Peterson say anything afterward, Mr. Johnson nodded. "After the shot, I heard him yell into his radio something like, 'Suspect resisted. Suspect is armed.' But I saw everything under the streetlight. Jamal's hands were empty. There was nothing in them, nothing at all. Several jurors exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear now Officer Peterson had lied in his radio report, likely to justify his use of deadly force. Next, the prosecution called Lieutenant David Ramirez from the Chicago Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. Lieutenant Ramirez had overseen the review of Peterson's incident report. On the stand, he confirmed that in his written statement, Peterson claimed the suspect, Evans, attacked and appeared to be holding a sharp metallic object resembling a knife or screwdriver. The room erupted in whispers. Everyone remembered the footage. Jamal's hands were clearly empty. The prosecutor asked pointedly, "Did your investigation uncover any such object at the scene or on the victim's body?" Lieutenant Ramirez responded firmly, "No." The only items recovered were a backpack containing books and school supplies. There were no knives, no screwdrivers, no weapons of any kind. He paused, then added, "Additionally, in the recorded dispatch audio right after the incident, Officer Peterson said, 'The suspect attacked me. I had to fire.'" That statement directly contradicts what the camera showed. Those words struck like hammers against the carefully crafted image of a heroic officer forced to act in self-defense. Not only had Peterson shot an unarmed teenager, but he had immediately tried to twist the narrative, abusing the authority of his badge to conceal the truth, from his radio transmission to his official report. The defense tried to mount a counterattack during cross-examination, but their efforts fell flat. They asked Mr. Johnson whether, given the nighttime conditions, he could have mistaken what he saw. He answered without hesitation, "I've worked night shifts for 20 years. My eyes are trained for darkness." The streetlights made it clear his hands were empty. Turning to Lieutenant Ramirez, the defense attorney grasped for doubt. "Is it possible Jamal discarded an object somewhere that wasn't recovered?" Ramirez shook his head. "We searched the area thoroughly, including nearby storm drains and bushes. There was absolutely nothing, and the footage shows clearly he never reached for anything." The evidence and testimony layered atop one another to form a damning picture. Mark Peterson had abused his power and then tried to bury the truth. Danielle scanned the jury. Some wore furrowed brows of anger. Others looked visibly disheartened, their eyes fixed on the defendant. In that moment, she could sense it, the scales of justice were beginning to tip toward truth. But she also knew this trial was far from over. The defense would fight back. And she, still holding her true identity close to the chest, remained the courtroom's secret wildcard, waiting for the right moment to shift the story's course forever. That afternoon, the trial resumed with the defense presenting its case. Peterson's lawyer made a bold move, calling Mark Peterson himself to the stand in an attempt to defend his actions. Peterson slowly walked to the witness stand. He had shed his police uniform in favor of a well-pressed suit, clearly aiming to appear respectable and sincere. He raised his hand and swore his oath, face calm. But Danielle noticed the tight line of his lips, a quiet sign of mounting anxiety. Answering his lawyer's questions, Peterson recounted his version of the night's events. His voice dropped into a somber tone, pretending to be filled with regret. "I never wanted this to happen. It was the worst moment of my career," he said, briefly scanning the jury as if pleading for their sympathy. "It was dark, and the young man made sudden movements. I thought he was reaching for a weapon. I shouted several times for him to stop, but he didn't listen. I had to make a split-second decision to protect myself. I'm devastated by the outcome." Danielle stared at him, unmoving. His delivery was smooth. He lowered his head at all the right moments, acting remorseful. but she remembered the cold expression on his face in the video as he handcuffed Jamal's dying body. She remembered the smug confidence he had shown that morning. His words might sound genuine to some, but to her, they were nothing more than performance. He never truly admitted fault. It was all excuses. "I had no choice." The lawyer pressed further, guiding Peterson to emphasize his clean record and character. "How long have you served in law enforcement, Officer Peterson?" 15 years. Peterson answered. "And during those 15 years, have you ever been reprimanded or disciplined for excessive force or misconduct?" "Never. I've always followed the law and done my best to protect the community." He turned to the jury, voice soft and pleading. "Protecting this city has been my life's mission. I'm heartbroken that someone lost their life. If I could go back and change it, I would." His voice cracked ever so slightly, just enough to appear believable. Some in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. A few shook their heads. Others exhaled with frustration. Jamal's family sat motionless. His mother stared at Peterson with disbelief, unable to reconcile his words with the man who had taken her son. To Danielle, each sentence from Peterson felt like a spark threatening to ignite the fire inside her. He was trying to paint himself as a devoted, unfortunate officer, a tragic figure caught in a bad moment, when in reality, his prejudice and power had ended an innocent life. As Peterson stepped down, his attorney turned to the jury with final remarks, emphasizing his client's spotless service record and urging them to see the shooting as a singular tragedy, a rare lapse in an otherwise honorable career. He asked the jury to view Peterson not as a villain, but as a human being who made a terrible mistake out of fear. The room grew quiet under the weight of his appeal. Tension hung in the air like a held breath. Then, the prosecutor stood. His voice was firm. "Your Honor, in the interest of full transparency, the prosecution requests permission to call one final witness." A murmur rose in the courtroom. The defense attorney shot up, clearly agitated. "What witness? The trial is nearly concluded. We were not informed of this." Before he could finish, the prosecutor turned toward the gallery and spoke clearly. "We call Special Agent Danielle Carter of the Federal Bureau of Investigation FBI to the stand." A wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. Danielle rose from the back row. For a moment, the entire room froze in disbelief. The quiet, reserved black woman who had sat unnoticed in the audience was now being called forward as an FBI agent. Whispers spread like wildfire. Officers who had sat behind Peterson turned their heads, stunned. Journalists scrambled to raise their cameras. The jury stared, mouths slightly agape. And Peterson, his eyes locked on Danielle, wide with disbelief, as if truly seeing her for the first time. The judge struck his gavel for silence, then turned to the prosecution. "You'll explain this immediately." The prosecutor remained calm. "Your Honor, the defense has repeatedly emphasized the defendant's spotless record and character. Our witness will provide firsthand, relevant information that directly challenges that narrative." The judge narrowed his eyes, then nodded slowly. "Proceed, but keep it focused and relevant." Danielle walked down the center aisle, each step steady despite the pounding of her heart. She knew the gravity of what was about to happen. As she reached the witness stand and turned to face the courtroom, her eyes swept across the sea of shocked faces, lawyers, jurors, the judge, and every spectator. She raised her hand and spoke clearly. "I, Danielle Carter, swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." In that instant, the mask was lifted. The woman who had been dismissed as a stranger now stood before them as a federal agent, a keeper of facts, a defender of justice, and a witness whose testimony could reshape the outcome of the entire trial. The courtroom held its breath. Because now, everyone knew Danielle Carter was not just watching. She was here to speak the truth and possibly to expose the secrets buried beneath Mark Peterson's so-called 15 perfect years. Were you surprised to learn Danielle's true identity? A woman who seemed invisible quietly seated in the back turned out to be the key to unraveling everything. What does this moment say about how society often judges people by appearances? Share your thoughts in the comments. The story isn't over yet, and what Danielle is about to reveal could change everything. The prosecutor approached the witness stand, standing just a few feet from Danielle. His tone was calm and deliberate. "Agent Carter, can you tell the court how you became involved in this case?" Danielle nodded, her gaze firm and focused. "I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, assigned to the Civil Rights Division. After the shooting of Jamal Evans, the Chicago field office launched an independent inquiry into potential violations of civil liberties. I was tasked with investigating Officer Mark Peterson's conduct and professional history." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Peterson's defense attorney sprang to his feet. "Objection. This investigation falls outside the scope of the current trial." The judge raised a hand. "You presented the defendant's record as evidence of good character. Now you'll hear the response. Objection overruled. But I expect the prosecution to stay relevant and concise." The prosecutor turned back to Danielle. "During your investigation, Agent Carter, what did you discover about the defendant's professional record?" Danielle took a breath, then delivered her words with crystal clarity, each sentence slicing through the tension in the room. "Our investigation found that during his 15 years on the force, Officer Peterson was involved in numerous incidents that raised serious concerns about abuse of authority. There were at least 12 formal complaints filed by civilians alleging misconduct, excessive force, or inappropriate behavior." Gasps filled the air. The number 12 hung in the courtroom like thunder. Danielle continued. "Most of the complaints were submitted by people of color. These reports spanned from 2010 to 2024, yet none of them resulted in significant disciplinary action." The defense attorney tried to interject again. "These unproven allegations are not directly relevant." The judge shot him a glare. "You claimed your client had a spotless record. Let the witness finish." Turning back to Danielle, he nodded once. "Focus on the most pertinent cases. Agent Carter." Danielle's fingers gripped each other gently atop the stand. Her voice remained composed but firm. "Yes, Your Honor. First, in 2010, Officer Peterson was involved in the arrest of a 16-year-old black teenager named Marcus Lee, suspected of petty theft. The boy suffered broken ribs while being handcuffed and was hospitalized. His family filed a formal complaint, alleging Peterson used excessive force. Internal Affairs concluded there was insufficient evidence, and no action was taken. Across the room, Peterson shook his head, eyes locked on Danielle, anger flashing. She didn't flinch. Second, in 2013, Officer Peterson stopped a vehicle for a traffic violation. The driver, a Latina woman named Sofia Torres, alleged that he verbally assaulted her and pepper sprayed her in the face. Despite her compliance, Ms. Torres filed a complaint. The matter was quietly settled by the Chicago Police Department, with a private apology and a small monetary compensation in exchange for withdrawal of the complaint. A low gasp from the gallery. Danielle glanced at the jury. She could see them leaning in now. Riveted. She continued, her voice gaining force. In 2016, Officer Peterson shot and wounded an unarmed black man named Anthony Walker during a foot chase. Peterson reported that Walker attacked him, but multiple eyewitnesses said Walker was running away and never turned toward the officer. The case was closed without charges. Peterson was placed on administrative leave for 1 month before returning to active duty. Peterson suddenly slammed his palm on the defense table and stood up. "This is outrageous! Those cases were settled years ago." His attorney tugged on his sleeve, signaling him to sit. But Peterson's anger had already erupted. The judge banged the gavel sharply. "Defendant, sit down and remain silent," after a tense moment. Peterson slowly lowered himself back into his seat, face flushed red with fury. Danielle remained calm. She turned her eyes toward the jury, locking their attention. These are only a few examples in a long and troubling pattern. Each case involved individuals from marginalized communities. Each ended without true accountability. Taken together, they paint a picture not of a single mistake, but of a consistent misuse of power. She paused before delivering the final blow. Based on these findings, the FBI determined that the shooting of Jamal Evans should not be viewed as an isolated tragedy, but potentially as the culmination of a long-standing pattern of civil rights violations by Officer Mark Peterson. Her testimony ended. Silence fell like a curtain over the courtroom. Jurors stared at one another in a mix of disbelief and outrage. The model officer who had claimed an unblemished record was now revealed to have a history riddled with buried complaints and brushed aside abuses. In the gallery, people shook their heads. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," before covering their mouth. Jamal's family sobbed softly, tears of pain, but also of clarity. Their son wasn't the first. He was just the latest. And Peterson, the once proud officer, now slumped forward in his chair, face buried in his hands. The arrogance that had defined him since day one had collapsed completely into shame. This was the prosecution's turning point. With Danielle's calm but damning testimony, the carefully polished image of Mark Peterson lay in ruins. The 15 perfect years were now a mask torn off, exposing the darkness beneath. And for the first time in that courtroom, justice felt within reach. The courtroom remained hushed after Danielle's explosive testimony. Peterson's defense attorney sat in stunned silence. The carefully crafted arguments he had prepared shattered beyond repair. The prosecution had completed its case. The trial was about to move into final arguments when, unexpectedly, Mark Peterson stood up and addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to say something," he said hoarsely. Every eye in the room turned toward him. His attorney reached out in alarm, trying to pull him back down, but Peterson gently brushed his hand away. There was something different in his eyes. Now gone was the defiance and false confidence. What remained was a man undone by the truth, carrying the unbearable weight of remorse. The judge studied him for a moment, then gave a measured nod. "You have the right to speak, but keep it brief." Peterson took a deep breath and turned to face the gallery specifically. Jamal Evans' family. His voice trembled as he began. I want to apologize." He swallowed hard, struggling to steady himself. His eyes were red, glassy. "First, to Jamal's family. I know this apology is far too late. I don't expect forgiveness, but from the bottom of my heart, I am truly sorry for taking Jamal's life." Mrs. Linda Evans stared at the man who had killed her son. Tears welled in her eyes again, falling silently down her weary cheeks. The entire courtroom was still. Peterson's voice broke as he looked down at the floor. "I was wrong. Completely wrong. I thought I was doing my duty protecting the community. But the truth is, I let fear and prejudice control me. I saw a threat where there was none. Jamal didn't deserve what happened to him. He didn't do anything wrong. His last words came out in a whisper, choked by sobs. People in the gallery reached for tissues. A few jurors lowered their eyes, visibly moved, to see Mark Peterson, once so rigid and untouchable. Now weeping in regret, it was a sight no one had anticipated. Turning back toward the judge and the prosecutor, Peterson continued, I want to apologize to this court for lying, for breaking the oath I took as an officer. Everything Agent Carter said was true. I abused my authority more times than I care to admit. I thought I was above consequences. I thought I could bury the truth. But I was wrong. And now, I have to face it. He wiped his face, voice barely audible. I'm deeply sorry for what I've done. I just wish I had realized it sooner, before it was too late. His attorney sighed heavily, head in his hands. Peterson had abandoned all legal defense. From the gallery, some of his former police colleagues looked away, shame on their faces. Others hung their heads. Mrs. Evans sobbed, shoulders shaking. Jamal's older brother placed an arm around her, his own eyes red, but reflecting a quiet relief as though a weight of anger had begun to lift. Danielle sat quietly, watching. Her heart clenched. The apology had come too late to save Jamal, but still, it meant something. She believed Peterson's remorse was real, and while the cost was tragically high, there was value in witnessing this rare moment of truth. The truth, and perhaps conscience, had finally pierced through years of denial and arrogance. The judge nodded slowly. The court acknowledges the defendant's statement. He looked Peterson directly in the eye. You're right. It's too late to undo what has been done. But admitting wrongdoing is a first step, however long the road ahead may be. He then turned to the jury, preparing to instruct them on their upcoming deliberation. The trial was drawing to a close. And now, for the first time, justice was within reach. 8. The verdict, justice served, hope rekindled. Late that afternoon, after hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom with a final decision. The room fell into complete silence as the jury foreman stood and faced the court. We, the jury, find the defendant, Mark Peterson, guilty of second-degree murder. The words echoed through the chamber, marking a moment where justice, at long last, prevailed. Mrs. Linda Evans broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but this time, the tears were not of grief, but of long-awaited relief. Her family reached to embrace her tightly. Some spectators in the gallery began to applaud softly before the judge raised a hand, asking for silence and order. At the defendant's table, Peterson closed his eyes, his face pale, lips trembling. He gave a faint nod, accepting the verdict. No protests. No more denial. The judge thanked the jury for their service and formally concluded the trial. He announced that sentencing would be scheduled for the following week. But with such a serious conviction, Peterson now faced years, perhaps decades, behind bars. As the courtroom emptied, Peterson was handcuffed and escorted out by court officers. Before stepping through the door, he turned back toward Jamal's family and whispered through his tears, I'm truly sorry. His voice faded as he disappeared behind the heavy doors. His once imposing figure now slumped and frail beneath the weight of accountability. Outside the courthouse, The sky over Chicago had turned golden in the early evening light. A quiet crowd of supporters, family, activists, and community members had gathered anxiously to await the news. When the courthouse doors opened and the quiet murmur of guilty spread, they responded not with cheers, but with gentle, tearful embraces. The atmosphere was subdued, but deeply emotional. They had marched for months, demanding justice for Jamal Evans. Today, they stood tall because their voices had finally been heard. Danielle stepped out of the courthouse, removing her FBI badge from her lapel and slipping it into her coat pocket. A cool breeze brushed past her face, as if the city itself was letting out a breath it had been holding for far too long. Mrs. Linda Evans approached her. The two women, one a grieving mother, the other a federal agent who had fought for the truth, stood in solemn silence for a moment. No words were needed. Their eyes met, and in that look was a shared understanding. Then, Mrs. Evans reached out and gently took Danielle's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. "Thank you for not forgetting my son." Danielle's eyes glistened. She placed her other hand atop the woman's trembling fingers. "No," she replied softly. "You gave us the strength. Your love for Jamal, your courage, inspired all of us." Far off, streetlights flickered on as dusk settled over the city. Danielle walked alone down the steps of the courthouse and into the quiet street beyond. She looked up at the darkening sky above Chicago, a strange peace washing over her. Justice had been served for Jamal Evans, something that didn't always happen for victims like him. This verdict couldn't bring Jamal back. But it was a beginning, a flicker of light in a long, shadowed history, a reason to believe that things could change. The story spread quickly across headlines nationwide. The rare public apology and conviction of former Officer Mark Peterson became a wake-up call, an urgent reminder that law enforcement must be held to the highest standards. For many, it was a step toward restoring the belief that truth matters and that marginalized voices can make a difference. For Danielle Carter, the image of Linda Evans holding her son's photo and smiling through tears would stay with her forever. It reminded her why she chose this path, to stand beside the vulnerable and to make sure justice doesn't abandon the ones without power. As she walked the sidewalk beneath the growing night, Danielle reminded herself the road ahead would still be long and difficult. But today, she had seen what truth and courage could do, and that was enough to believe that even the deepest injustices ingrained, protected, and repeated could still be dismantled. One truth at a time, one voice at a time, with justice and hope. Thank you for joining Stories Around Us on this journey toward justice for Jamal Evans. This story doesn't end with a verdict. It begins with a renewed belief that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will find its voice. That every act of courage, every voice raised, has the power to create change. If you believe that justice is a path we must walk together, and that stories like this deserve to be heard, please like this video to honor the courage behind the truth. Comment below, share your thoughts, or tell a story of injustice you've witnessed. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next powerful journey. At Stories Around Us, we tell real stories because hope, empathy, and justice begin with being heard. See you in the next story.